All right, the Salem witch trials here for part two of our ongoing lecture here. As we study colonial society. So the Salem witch trials, again, popularized in not only written plays but also the silver screen, and it was an actual event. In 1692, you have the small town of Salem in the Massachusetts Bay Colony experiencing really a bout of mass hysteria and paranoia. Again, this is where young girls were beginning to behave strangely and outright accuse adults of being agents of the devil. A witch hunt is going to ensue, in which primarily several women, some men lost their lives as a result of being accused of witchcraft. Um, there are a variety of theories as to exactly what triggered this event and why it went to the extremes it did. Some say that young children were seduced by uh, black magic introduced to them by Tituba, a black woman from the Caribbean, who taught these girls um, voodoo and other types of mysticism, and that this got taken out of context, carried to an extreme. Prognostications about the future, just was taken to an extreme where these children began to claim seeing spirits and being commanded by them. Other scholars argue that the entire town succumbed to the effects of what is known as ergot. This is a mold actually that grows on wheat and other grains. It was harvested, and when it's baked into products like bread, the mold becomes somewhat like that of having the effects when it's consumed. It can have the effects on the human body that are similar to LSD, so that the entire town, in the case of some historians, was suffering from a massive acid trip that led to hallucinations and irrationality. Now, that is largely debased. It's amusing, it's entertaining, but these were this was a theory that was most popular in the 1960s, when these types of uh, drugs were being consumed, and therefore might be uh, mutually kind of reinforcing as far as, well, perhaps that what was happening. It's not to say that it is completely outside the realm of possibility. Ergot is a mold. It does have these effects, but you know, it's extremely difficult to prove, uh, you know, through tangible historical evidence. What's most likely, and this was largely as a result of research coming out in the 1990s, so it's much more contemporary, it's much more thoroughly researched, and it's much more convincing as far as the aspects that we're covering here in this lecture, is that this paranoia emerged as a result of uh, established colonists reacting to newcomers, and that people reacted irrationally in many cases to the perceived fear of change and disruption to the established social order. Um, so, and this was largely as a result of a community known as Old Salem, these established colonists, reacting to the emergence of what was called New Salem, kind of a second wave of migration that was beginning to take place in more kind of newer arrivals coming to the eastern seaboard. It's interesting that Old and New Salem merged the year before, that is to say in 1691. The Salem witch trials broke out and reached a kind of a climactic consequences. So uh, the older, when you overlay these two communities and you see who were the accusers and who were the accused, you see that, and where they lived, whether they lived in Old or New Salem, what you find out really for the most part, and it breaks between these two communities, is that the older uh, settlers, the established settlers in Old Salem, were the ones that were doing the accusing of the newcomers for having these kinds of very extreme corrupting kind of witchcraft type tendencies. Again, this is you might say a less attractive, even a dark side of American identity. This idea, this ongoing struggle between tradition and change, where one community doesn't want to change, has established itself, and now has to react to a new circumstances. And so this is something that these Puritans are going to grapple with. What's interesting is that they're all Puritans primarily. I mean, that they're all part of essentially the same broader community. It's just a matter of whether they're established colonists or newcomers. This is a nice segue here, and this is happening at the end of the 17th century. So we'll see examples of this in different contexts as we move forward for the remainder of the course. But it's a nice segue into understanding the rapid development of the English colonies roughly during this period of time, because these tensions are going to emerge as these colonies grow. What am I talking about? Well, between 1640 and the year 1700, the population in the English colonies grew from 26,000 individuals to approximately 251,000 people. That's about a tenfold increase in just 60 years. And so this is going to help fuel this conundrum that people wanted social order and hierarchy, but they also at the same time wanted upward mobility, kind of a so you have a paradox here where people want social order and rigidity, but at the same time they want social flexibility, want it to be flexible enough so that people can improve their lot in life and their standard of living. That's why people came to the New World in the first place. People that, and this gets back to what was existing in Europe at the time, which was a more static and a much more rigid social structure, where social status, property classes, and wealth were much harder to come by, much harder to attain if you didn't have it, because land was in short supply. The land that was available in Europe was already, predetermined. It was already, in the hands of a landed class. So those that did not own land or property were, really had no chance of ever attaining um, that type of stature. The inheritance here is being kept in the hands of the landed class. So social movement, social mobility was not extremely unlikely in Europe. And so if you're a member of the landed class in Europe, the impetus, the necessity for settlement, the drive for it is not there. I mean, that you are, if you are part of the landed aristocracy in Europe, then for the most part you are benefiting from the status quo. You're benefiting from the social structure in place. If you aren't, however, and you hear about a place in colonies where you can work land for yourself, own the land in which you're working, and have a better prospect at making your way up the social ladder, then you may be more inclined to take the risk of making that transatlantic transit and try and you know risking it all essentially to better yourself, better your lot in life. So at the same time that there's this rapid population growth in the colonies, there's also a parallel rapid population growth taking place in Europe. Cities are becoming overcrowded. People are looking for work. And so this is yet another motive, another factor in which people had to contemplate moving to the new world. If you got to this kind of land of opportunity, that was essentially the main problem. Funding or paying your way across was one problem, which indentured servitude helped to mitigate. But it's also going to lead to another example here in 1676, where you're going to have social conflict erupting in not in New England, but farther south in Virginia, that is also beginning to suffer some social friction between a power structure that was basically defined by the governor of Virginia at the time, the Virginia colony, and those that wanted to ascend the social hierarchy, uh, which was best represented by one individual, a man by the name of Nathaniel Bacon. To give context here, in what becomes known as Bacon's Rebellion, it was quite short-lived in 1676, but again, it's a prime example of what was the frictions that were at play here. So the Virginia governor at the time was a man by the name of Sir William Berkeley, and he was appointed uh, by the company, the Virginia, or excuse me, the London Company of Virginia. He was also, had the basically the blessing of the powers that be in the seats of power in London, as far as political representation, the monarchy, and when he attained the governorship of the colony, William Berkeley quickly set about to consolidate political power among his friends within the colony itself. And because he was the governor, he enjoyed a healthy amount of control over the administration of the colony. And so one of his first acts was to raise the requirements necessary for voting within the colony of Virginia. Voting was determined by land ownership, and so colonists, as a result of Berkeley's decree, colonists needed a threshold of 50 acres of property, of land, to meet the requirements for becoming an eligible voter. Um, and so we have this direct link between voting rights and wealth, wealth in the form of property. So those landowners that did not meet that threshold, including the likes of of Nathaniel Bacon, obviously began to contest the governor's authority. It didn't help matters also that Berkeley levied heavier taxes, hurting colonists in a bad economic time as it was anyway. Now, Nathaniel Bacon was a plantation owner, so he did own property, actual land, and he at the time he was isolated from power not only politically and ideologically, but also physically. He was one of the kind of located on the frontier of the Virginia colony, and Nathaniel Bacon quickly organized opposition against Berkeley, which grew actually for a very short time into open rebellion, in which these landowners that did not meet the threshold took matters into their own hands. What's interesting is that this was not only a contest for political rights, but it was also a conflict over security as well. It's during this period of time that there were increasingly bloody raids that were occurring where Native American populations or tribes would cross over the frontier and raid plantations, farms within the Virginia colony. And so Nathaniel Bacon here and his cronies are going to take matters into their own hands as far as organizing themselves to fight off these frontier threats from the native population. This, of course, would put colonial Native American relations into a tailspin, something that the governor, William Berkeley, was not particularly enthused about because it became an increasingly, a problem that he had to deal with, that he had, occupied more and more of his time and attention and energy, and also, served to act as a drain on resources and manpower. And so Berkeley was upset with the likes of Nathaniel Bacon and his rebels for affecting these relations more broadly. This example of what comes to be known as Bacon's Rebellion was short-lived. Bacon died of disease just as the rebellion was beginning to enjoy some sort of early success, and Berkeley was able to crush the rebellion once Bacon was removed from the scene, and Berkeley was able to reestablish control. What is significant about this is that it's yet another example here of the discontent between the social friction that's beginning to take place, this kind of have and have not. It's also interesting and significant that this is taking place outside of New England. So it gives us a broader understanding of how colonists are beginning to struggle with the existing order in many cases, and some colonists a century later in the 1770s began to point to this example of Bacon's Rebellion occurring a century earlier in order to legitimize their own frustrations with established power in the colonies on the eve of the eruption of the American Revolution. That this added a sense of legitimacy to take up action because this had been a problem for such a long period of time, this 100 years. It's extremely important to understand that Bacon's Rebellion has nothing to do directly with the American Revolution. They happen a century apart. It's just a matter of people taking the event that happened 100 years earlier and using it as a symbol, essentially, to legitimize their frustrations. Um, so that is kind of an additional element and factor that was playing into the socio-political kind of climate in at least two different portions of the English colonies. So again, just to wrap up, you have life in these colonies that was very different. It was very difficult to cope with carving out a living. Things like disease and depression led many a premature death, and in some cases, people actually just gave up and went back to England. But from this hard life, if they managed to carve out an existence, managed to acclimate themselves, then they could begin to focus more attention on making not only a living for themselves but also a lifestyle that Roger Williams, the likes of Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, exemplify that type of event, type of trend, where they begin to challenge the established social order and its teachings. We can also see that in a less constructive way with the events of the Salem witch trials, but really throughout the colonies, you're going to see this kind of begin to manifest itself roughly as we progress through the 17th century, where voting and representative assemblies in the case of the Virginia colony were becoming more popular, and then the consequences that this held for the events like the Bacon's Rebellion. So what I want to follow up on, and this will be kind of in part 3 of the lecture that coming up, is to highlight and discuss how exactly you have these conditions within the English colonial experience begin to butt up against and clash with, or justify in a corrupt kind of way, perhaps through our 21st century mindset, experiences and interactions and relations with non English or non European populations. And that's where we're going to turn attention in the third segment here in just a moment.